So I'm working on part 2 of versions of the Bible. I myself have 3. I have the NIV, I have the Holy Land edition, and I have King James. But this is just a basic history of a lot of things. So we left off on the old English versions of the Bible. So we got to this Wyclif's versions. In the Middle Ages, parts of the Bible were translated from Latin into several of the dialects of Western Europe. These included the Bohemian, Czech, and Italian languages, as well as provincial dialect of southeastern France. But none of these compared to the importance of the work of John Wycliffe, a pioneering reformer who translated the entire Bible from Latin into English language. Wycliffe, who lived from 1330 to 1384, master of Balliol College, Oxford. That's cool. He went to Oxford. Was a distinguished scholar and preacher, but he was also a social reformer who wanted to replace the feudal organization of the state and church with a system of emphasized man's direct responsibility to God. The constitution of this new order would be the law of God, which Wycliffe equated with the Bible. Before this could happen, the law of God had to be accessible to the laity as well as the clergy, the unlearned as well as the learned. This called for a Bible in English as well as Latin, so Wycliffe and his associates undertook the task of translating the entire Bible from the Latin Vulgate into the contemporary English. So I believe this must be the first English Bible, but it's still coming from the Latin Bible, the Latin Vulgate that they had, but it's the translation. But the Latin Vulgate comes from some, so we're just going to keep going. There are actually 2 Wycliffe versions of the Bible. An earlier one produced from 1380 and 1384 during Wycliffe's lifetime, and later a version completed in 1395, 11 years after his death. The earlier version is thoroughly a literal translation. Wycliffe followed the Latin construction without attempting to render the meaning into good English idiom. The translators produced a literal version because it was intended to serve as the law book for the new order. The Latin next of the law book was already established as the English text and to follow it word for word. About 2/3 of this version was produced by one of Wycliffe's supporters, Nicholas and Hereford. Wycliffe himself may have done some of the translation work in the remaining portion. Yeah, he mixed it. He mixed it up. Portion. By the time this first translation was completed, the movement with which English social reformer was associated with the condemned by the authorities. Now to the second Wycliffe version was the work of his secretary, John Purvey. It was based on the earlier version, but it was rendered into English. Purvey's version became very popular, though its circulation was restricted by the church officials. It was suppressed in 1408 by a document known as the Constitutions of Oxford, which forbade anyone to translate or even read in any part of the Bible in English without the permission of the bishop or local church council. These constitutions remained in force for more than a century. Hey, unless you go to your priest or you go to the highest ranking guy in your whole state, you can't even read the Bible if you speak this language. That was English. From Wycliffe to King James. Here we go to the most popular now. More than 200 years passed from the time of Wycliffe's second English version was issued in 1395 until the historic King James version was published in 1611. Good old King James, man. The best version, I believe. But that's just an opinion. These were fruitful years for the new versions of the Bible. The stage was set for the monumental King James Bible by 5 different English translations. 5 different English translations that were issued during these times. Tyndale. The years from about 1450 onward brought exciting cultural changes in Western Europe. The revival of interest in classical biblical learning was already under the way and received a stimulus from the migration of Greek scholars to the West and the fall of Constantinople. to the Turks in 1533 with the invention of printing in Germany. The promoters of new learning found a new technology at their disposal. Yeah, the Bible was the first printed book. Among the first products of the printing press were the editions of the Bible. The first major work to be printed was the famous Gutenberg edition. So the Gutenberg was the first printed of the Latin Bible. In 1456, the following decades brought printed editions of the Hebrew Bible, the Greek New Testament, and the Septuagint. The leaders of the Protestant Reformation were quick to take advantage of this new innovation with the advance of their efforts in church reform. Making a Bible available in the tongue of the common people was a major strategy in the Reformers' policy. Martin Luther, leader of the Reformation, translated the New Testament from Greek into German in 1522, and the Old Testament from Hebrew into German in the following years. What Luther did for the Germans, William Tyndale did for people of England. After completing his studies at the universities of Oxford and Cambridge, so it's prestigious stuff, William Tyndale, 1495 to 1536, so he lived 40 years, almost, devoted his time and his talents to providing his fellow Englishmen with the scriptures of his own language. He hoped that Bishop Tunstall of London would sponsor his project by translating the Bible until the bishop refused to do so. Tyndale then went to Germany in 1524 to undertake his project. By August of 1525, his English New Testament was complete. Way to get him, Tyndale. Tyndale's translation differed. That's not in the book. Tyndale's translation differed into two important respects to the versions of Wycliffe. It was rendered not from the Latin language, but is not Greek original, and it's circulated in printed form, not as a handy-copied manuscript from the New Testament. Tyndale moved into Old, issuing an edition of the Pentateuch, the Book of Jonah, and the revision of Genesis. Later in 1534, Tyndale issued a revision of his New Testament, justly described as altogether Tyndale's noblest monument. A further revision of the New Testament appeared in 1535. In May of that year, Tyndale was arrested, and after an imprisonment of 17 months, he was sentenced to death as a heretic. He was strangled and burned at the stake of Vildevord near Brussels on October 6, 1536. That sucks. I just gave Tyndale props, and now they did that. That's not what I really wanted to see go down, but, people were doing crazy. There was some stuff. Because of what Tyndale did, Tyndale started a tradition in the history of what the English Bible has endured to this day, which is commonly called the Bible English. It is really Tyndale's English. His wording in those portions of the Bible which is translated was retained in King James Version to a great degree. The latest and successions of the revisions which stand in the Tyndale tradition is a New King James Version. But even those versions did not set out to adhere his tradition, such as the New International Version, showing his influence. Coverdale and Matthew. At the time of Tyndale's death, printed editions of the English Bible bearing the dedication to King Henry VIII had been circulating in England for nearly a year. This was the first education of the Bible issued by Miles Coverdale, who lived from 88 to 1568. 1488, one of Tyndale's friends and associates. So Miles Coverdale. This English version reproduced Tyndale's translation of the Pentateuch and the New Testament. The rest of the Old Testament was translated into English from Latin and German versions. Coverdale's Bible in 1535 was the first complete English Bible in print. So it's Coverdale. Miles Coverdale was the first English Bible in print. A second and third edition appeared in 1537. The title page bore words set forth with the king's most gracious license. But this was not the only English Bible to appear in 1537 with the words on the title page. Another of Tyndale's associates, John Rogers, published the edition of the Bible under the name Thomas Matthew's Bible, was similar to Coverdale's with one exception. Its translation of the historical books from Joshua to the 2 Chronicles was one that Tyndale had finished without publishing before his death. The Great Bible. Now, this is called the Great. Official policy towards the translated and circulation of the Bible in England changed quickly. King Henry's break with the Roman Catholic Pope in Rome in 1534 had something to do with it, but the deeper factors were also involved. A landmark in the history of the English Bible was the Royal Injuncture of September 1538. Directing the Royal Injunction in September 1538, directing that one book of the whole Bible was of the largest volume in English. Directing that one book of the whole Bible that was the largest volume in English should be placed in every parish church in England where the people could have access to it. When this decree was issued, another version of the Bible, the Great Bible, was being prepared so this commandment could be followed. Publication of the Great Bible was delayed because the French officials halted its production in Paris, where it was being printed. The printing was then transferred to London, where the Great Bible appeared in 1539. The Great Bible was Coverdale's reversion of Matthew's Bible, which means it was essentially a copy of Tyndale's translation. It quickly became the authorized version of the English Bible. So hopefully we have time to get to King James. The Geneva Bible. During the reign of Mary Tudor from England in 1530 to 1558, many English reformers sought refuge in other parts of Europe because of her policy of persecution. One community of English refugees settled in Geneva, Switzerland, where John Knox was pastor of an English congregation where John Calvin dominated the theological study. Many of these English refugees were fine scholars. They did their work on the New English Version of the Bible, a preliminary edition of the New Testament. Whittingham's New Testament was published in 1557. This was the first edition of any part of the English Bible to have text divided into verses. The whole Bible appeared in 1560. The Geneva Bible was the first English Bible to be translated in entirety from the original biblical languages. Widely recognized as the best English version of the Bible that had appeared, it quickly became the accepted version in Scotland. In England, it also attained instant popularity among the people, although it was not accepted by the church officials. After the publication of the King James Version in 1611, the Geneva Bible remained popular. There was the Bible which pilgrims took with them to the New World in 1620. This was the Bible that pilgrims took with them to the... So this is the book... The Geneva Bible is the one that came to America. So, to them, the King James Version was a compromise and inferior production. The Geneva Bible was printed until 1644 and was still found in use 30 years later. The King James Version. Shortly after James VI of Scotland ascended to the throne of England as James I, 1603, he convened a conference to settle matters under dispute of the Church of England. The only important result in this conference was an approval to begin work on the King James Version of the English Bible, KJV. A group of 47 scholars divided into 6 teams was appointed to undertake the work of preparing this new version. 3 teams worked on the Old Testament, 2 were responsible for the New Testament, and 1 worked on the Apocrypha. They used the 1602 edition of the Bishop's Bible as the basis of their revision, but they had access to many other versions and helps, as well as texts in the original biblical languages. When the 6 groups had completed their task, the final draft was reviewed by a committee of 12. The King James Version was published in 1611. So still the most popular Bible today, at least what people say is, okay, 1611 is when it was published. The new version won wide acceptance among the people of the English-speaking world. Non-sectarian in tone and approach, it did not favor one shade or theological ecclesiastical opinion over one and the other. The translations had almost instinctive sense of good English style to prose rhythms. The version gave it a secure place in the public memory. Never was a version of the Bible more admirably suited for reading aloud in public. So we're going to switch up. This is part 2 of different Bible versions.